Laura and I had been married for over 5 years, and it still felt like we were on our honeymoon. We continued to make love daily, sometimes even more, and cared for each other just as much as we did on our wedding day. I loved her so much that while working, I translate law books and official documents. I often took breaks to daydream about her and how we'd make love when she got home from work. My workspace was a large room above our 3-car garage that I had converted into an office. It featured 2 large windows, one with a view of the front yard and the other overlooking the backyard. The office also had a small kitchen and a tiny bathroom, so I didn't have to go into the main house for snacks or bathroom breaks. It had its own gas heating system for winter and a separate air conditioning unit for summer. I had a private phone line installed in my office to avoid house calls while working and work calls when spending time with Laura. The office also had a small library for my reference books and a sound system, as I enjoy listening to soft music while working. I am a professional translator, usually translating documents from French to Spanish or Spanish to French. I am a 4th-generation American. My parents died when I was young, and I was sent to live in Canada with an aunt who spoke mostly French. I attended a French school there. When I was 14, my aunt died, and I moved in with my Spanish-speaking grandmother in a small town a few hundred miles from San Diego. Naturally, I learned Spanish, as most of my friends spoke the language. My French and Spanish are now excellent, while my English is just okay. I met Laura at university, and we quickly fell in love. She was very shy and studying to be a teacher. She never mentioned past boyfriends, and I am fairly sure I was her first. She was a virgin when we first made love, and her initial lack of sexual knowledge confirmed this. Laura is tall, with long, straight legs and firm thighs. She has a round, attractive bum and a small waist. Her hips are slightly wider than usual, giving her a voluptuous look as if she was made for enjoying sex. But her most attractive features by far are her lovely face and her large, firm breasts, which show no signs of sagging. Laura is a brunette with plump lips and high cheekbones, and her voice is soft and slightly lower and sexier than you'd expect from a woman. She definitely draws attention when she walks down the street. I've often seen men turn their heads to watch her pass by. As mentioned earlier, we didn't have any children yet, but after 5 years of marriage, we were thinking of starting a family soon. Neither my wife nor I had any living family when we got married. So, after seeing an ad in the newspaper about the Canadian government looking for translators for trade agreement documents signed with South American countries, I applied for the job. Since 1/3 of the Canadian population speaks French, they needed someone perfectly bilingual in French and Spanish, who also knew English. This fit me perfectly, so I applied for and got the job. Laura also found a job as a grade 2 teacher at a primary school in our town. The pay was good since teachers in Canada are paid much more generously than in the States. We lived just on the outskirts of a small town in the Gatineau Hills, across the river from Ottawa, and I was making very good money working mostly from home. We owned a 200-acre wooded lot with huge trees of all kinds. Our large house was situated just in front of a small river that led to a large lake. Life was good. I really loved the 4 seasons of Canada. In summer, we enjoyed boating and fishing on the lake, and in winter, when the lake froze over, we explored on our snowmobiles across the lake and into the hills on the other side. There were all sorts of game to hunt, but both my wife and I are animal lovers, so we never went hunting. My story begins just after our 5th wedding anniversary. It was October, and Laura had started a new school year. She loved her new class, and for some reason, she seemed much happier than usual lately. I didn't complain since we were still making love passionately and frequently. However, I noticed that each morning she seemed very eager to go to work, and in the last month, she had developed a habit of going back to her school every Saturday afternoon. She would go there either to change the decorations in her classroom or to work on her class preparations. I didn't mind, of course, since she always returned home by 4 or 5 in the afternoon. When she arrived, we would change and then go out to eat. Later in the evening, we either went dancing or stayed home to watch television and make love. Yes, life was good. Then one Wednesday evening, after working in my office for about an hour, I went down to the main kitchen to get something to eat from the fridge. I heard her talking on the phone. Normally, I wouldn't pay attention to her conversations, but when I distinctly heard her say, "Was your wife angry with you, Tom?" I knew she was talking to Tom Higgins, another teacher at her school. Of course, there was nothing suspicious about it. However, as soon as she noticed me in the kitchen, she abruptly told Tom she had to go and hung up the phone. When I asked her who she was talking to, she claimed it was Nancy, another teacher at her school. For the first time that I could remember, I knew she had just lied to me. But why? Throughout the rest of the week, I couldn't stop wondering why she didn't want me to know she was talking to Tom on the phone. The more I tried to rationalize it, the more confused I became. The following Saturday afternoon, after she left for school, I even drove there to check if her car was in the parking lot. It was. I then went to an electronics store and bought telephone wire and a flashing light telephone. In just an hour, I installed an extension telephone line from the basement phone entrance to my office, passing the wire through the garage. Whenever someone used the house line, a light would flash, but my office phone wouldn't ring since I had disconnected it. I hid the phone in a locked desk drawer in my office. To prevent Laura from hearing the house phone ring and discovering the extension, since she often came into my office to clean or chat with me, I kept the bell off. The very next Sunday evening around 8, as I had been working in my office for about 10 minutes with the drawer containing the extension phone open, I noticed the light flashing. I immediately picked up the phone and listened. It was indeed Tom, and Laura had called him. They discussed school matters for a few minutes, but suddenly Tom asked if she regretted what happened on the previous Saturday. "I think letting you kiss me was wrong," she admitted. "We're both married, and even though it was just a little kissing, we shouldn't have done it, Tom. But I know you enjoyed it as much as I did, Laura. We're both adults, and it made me feel like a teenager again. Besides, I've wanted to kiss you since the day I met you." Laura laughed at his comment, and it was clear she wasn't angry. In fact, she was sending signals that she wanted more. "You're being naughty, Tom. What would Ruth say if she knew you kissed me? We were half an hour late getting home. Didn't she ask for an explanation?" "No, she wasn't mad. She'll never find out about us kissing. It's our secret. Besides, Ruth and I do kiss often, but our love life isn't what you'd expect from a couple married for 2 years." "What do you mean by that, Tom?" "Well, it's hard to believe, but I don't think Ruth will ever be able to have a baby. She's just over 5 feet tall, and her body is almost like a child's. Since I'm so tall and large, I have to be careful when we try to make love. She says it hurts her. In fact, we've never made love properly yet." "You're joking, right?" "I wish I were, Laura, but it's the truth. I'm exceptionally large down there, and with Ruth being so small, well, you can imagine. I bet you and Jack don't have this problem." There was a long pause. I could hear Laura's fast breathing, and she sounded excited. Finally, she asked him, "Are you really that big down there, Tom? How big are you?" I was shocked and growing angrier by the minute. Here was my wife, talking to a married man and asking about the size of his cock. "Well, to be frank, I'm above average in that department. But I bet it would fit nicely in you, Laura." If he'd been standing in front of me, I would have hit him. How dare he make such a remark to my wife? I almost interrupted to confront him and risk making a fool of myself. "Tom Higgin, don't joke like that." She was faking anger, and I could tell. It lasted only a few seconds before she continued. "Imagine what our spouses would say if they heard you talk like that." But she was laughing, and I knew her reaction would only encourage him to continue. "Well, you did ask how big I was, Laura. To tell you the truth, when I was in university, a bunch of guys had a party. We were more than half drunk, and we measured our equipment. Believe it or not, mine was 9.5 inches long at the time, and I think it's even bigger now. I had the longest and fattest one in the group even then." Again, there was a long pause on the phone before Laura changed the subject, and they resumed talking about school matters. That evening, Laura was wild in bed. She even asked me about the size of my cock. I knew she was trying to figure out if I was smaller than average, considering I was the only one she'd ever seen or touched down there. With my 7 inches, I knew I was about average, and that's exactly what I told her. We ended up making love again that evening, but I could tell that the seeds of curiosity had begun to grow in her mind. I was now afraid that this curiosity might lead her to investigate more about the matter. To make things worse, I didn't know how to prevent her from wondering, how would it feel to experience a bigger cock? Would it stretch me, or would it fit perfectly? From that day on, I became very worried, and I suppose it showed a little. My wife even remarked once, asking if something was wrong. How could I tell her that I had overheard her talking to Tom on the phone? I was pretty sure now that it was only a matter of time before she cheated on me with him, and I didn't know what to do. One thing I knew, though, was that I was deeply in love with my wife and didn't want to lose her. At the same time, I certainly didn't want to be a cuckold. I couldn't do much work that week, and as Saturday approached, I felt worse. She left for school at 1:15 on Saturday afternoon. As soon as she was out of the house, I got into my car and drove to her school. I was so close behind her that I even saw her entering the building. There were many other cars in the parking lot since it was Saturday, with various sports activities going on outside and in the gym. I managed to park my SUV at the other end of the lot, still having a view of her green Toyota and the main door of the school. Less than 15 minutes later, I saw her walk out of the school accompanied by Tom. They got into his car and drove away. I followed them and soon found myself on a small country road leading toward the lake. After a couple of miles, they turned into the driveway of a small wooden cottage, which I figured must belong to Tom. He certainly wasn't taking her there to prepare classes. No, they were going there to have sex. I drove past the cottage a few times and finally stopped half a mile further. My dinner was now trying to come up, and I had to throw up outside before making a mess in the SUV. It's impossible to describe what I felt then. It was as if my whole world had shattered. It felt like the end of my existence. Laura was my whole life, my only reason for living, and now she was with another man, probably making love to him. I won't deny shedding a few tears that afternoon. I realized I didn't own her or her body, but it devastated me to think that she would allow another man to take her sexually when she had promised herself to me on our wedding day. I took that promise seriously and thought she did too. Discovering what I had just found out made me question my whole value system. I wondered if I had been a fool my whole life to believe in fidelity, love, and all that goes with it. No matter what anyone says, the most damaging aspect of a cheating partner isn't that they had sex with someone else. It's that you can no longer believe in them or anything they say or do. You lose all trust in them. Throughout your marriage, you thought you were first in their life, and now you feel vulnerable and frightened. For a few seconds, I felt the urge to get out of the car and walk to the cottage to see exactly what they were doing through one of the many windows I had seen while driving by. But I suppose I already knew the answer, and seeing my wife naked under another man would have been too much for me. So instead, I slowly drove back home, once again passing the small wooden cottage where she was with Tom. I knew I had to think carefully about my next course of action, but I was in too much pain at that moment to plan anything. When Laura walked into the house around 5, it was easy to tell she had been doing something she shouldn't have done. She had trouble walking normally, taking only short and slow steps. She was also extremely nervous, and more importantly, she couldn't look me in the eyes as I sat around the kitchen table observing her. Even while preparing supper, I didn't feel like eating out that day. She kept dropping things. When I tried to make casual conversation, I had to repeat myself often, and her answers to some of my questions were unrelated to what I had asked. It was clear she had important things on her mind. After a while, I gave up and went to sit in the living room while she continued with supper preparation. As soon as we finished eating and put the dishes away, she went upstairs and took a shower. Gradually, during the evening, she became her usual self again, and we watched a movie together. For a while, I was tempted to confront her about knowing where she had been and what she had done that afternoon, but I realized I needed to think carefully about my response. In my mind, I imagined killing Tom multiple times and even envisioned beating Laura, but I knew that wasn't a solution. It would only make the situation infinitely worse. Without fully realizing it at the time, I had probably decided to try to work things out and save our marriage if possible. That evening, Laura initiated sex with me and was relentless in bed. I knew she felt guilty about her cheating and was trying to make it up to me through sex. However, I noticed that she was extremely stretched when I first entered her. I could hardly feel any friction, which confirmed that she had been with a man with a very large cock that afternoon. This made me a cuckold, and I could only hope that her body would return to its normal size eventually. Life went on, and Laura continued her affair with Tom every Saturday afternoon. I never found the courage to confront her about it, nor did I try to prevent her from seeing him. I know most people would call me a wimp and a coward for tolerating her infidelity, but I feared the unpredictable outcome of revealing my knowledge of the affair. I loved Laura deeply and wasn't ready for a divorce. I believed that her affair with Tom would eventually fizzle out and that things would return to how they were before. I was sad most of the time, and she noticed my low mood, but she likely thought I was completely unaware of her affair. This went on through the winter and into late June. Then one evening, she dropped a bombshell on me. Throughout our marriage, we had often discussed starting a family. She had always been the one to delay it. So, on that fateful evening, while we were sitting on the couch in front of the television, she suddenly said, "I have a surprise for you, honey." Her body was pressed against mine, and she held one of my hands with both of hers. For a few seconds, my heart stopped beating as I feared she was about to confess her affair with Tom. "What is it?" Laura mistook the shock on my face for fear or anger. "You'll be so happy, Jack, when you hear what I have to tell you. I did something that will please you. For the last 2 months, I've stopped taking my pills, and I'm pregnant now." With those words, she threw her arms around my neck and kissed me passionately. Before I could respond, she had my cock out of my pants and into her mouth. I must admit, Laura gives incredible oral sex. Her deep throat technique is exceptional. Before I could fully process what she'd told me, pleasure consumed me. Even after I climaxed in her mouth, she continued pleasuring me until I was overcome with pleasure again 15 minutes later. Saturday afternoon was her final rendezvous with Tom before summer vacation, and I decided I would confront her as soon as she returned home. I wanted to catch her off guard right after her session with him. When she entered the house at 5, she kissed me and said she would change into jeans before cooking supper. She had left the house after dinner wearing a short skirt and blouse, and I knew she was in a hurry to shower and erase any traces from her recent encounter. I began following her as she climbed the stairs to our room. Sensing my presence behind her, she grew nervous and asked if something was wrong. "Yes, something is very wrong, dear. Please sit on the bed, and let's talk." "What's the matter, Jack? You look so serious. It scares me to see you like this." Clearly, she still believed I was completely unaware of her affair with Tom. After several encounters at his cottage, she had grown confident in her affair, and any initial guilt had vanished. I knew I was about to catch her completely off guard. "There's something you need to know. Our marriage depends on what happens in this room right now." Her expression shifted from relaxed to shocked in an instant. I could see fear flicker across her face. Sitting beside her on the bed, I placed my hand on her knee and slowly moved it under her short denim skirt. She immediately covered my hand with hers, trying to stop me from going further. "Wait, Jack, give me a moment. I need to shower, and then we can make love. I worked up a sweat changing the classroom decorations this afternoon." Her lips trembled now, and her complexion turned from a healthy pink to a pale white as the blood drained from her face. "Either you let me touch you right now, or you can pack your things and leave. I want to see you now, before you shower." As I watched, tears welled in her eyes. She opened and closed her mouth, trying to speak, but no words came out. The pressure she exerted on my hand grew more intense as I continued to stare into her pale face. I sensed she was preparing to resist me. In our 6 years of marriage, she had never once tried to prevent me from touching her. I think her own reaction surprised her. "But Please, Jack, just give me a minute." She was on the verge of tears now. In that moment, I wanted to embrace her, to kiss her, but I knew that would only show weakness in her eyes. "Laura, think carefully about what you're going to do now. If you want to remain my wife and continue living with me, you'll let me touch you now. If I leave this room without examining you, we're finished as a couple. Decide now." Tears streamed down her face freely. I suppose by now, she finally realized that I knew something about her infidelity. As she sobbed openly, I felt the tension in her grip on my hand lessen, and she finally removed her hand, allowing me access. I took the opportunity to slowly slide my hand higher up her thigh until I reached the edge of her panties, then I pressed my hand against the fabric. The crotch of her panties was wet and slippery. I guided her to lie back on the bed, her legs hanging over the edge, and I lifted her skirt around her waist. She wore lacy, light blue panties I had never seen before, but what caught my attention was the shiny wet spot on the front. It was clear she had been intimate, and evidence had leaked onto her panties. She lay on her back, crying uncontrollably, hiding her face with both hands. As I stood to remove her panties, I realized I was aroused, though I tried to hide it from her. The sight of my wife's intimacy with another man excited me, and I was angry at myself for feeling that way. I knew I should be disgusted and furious, not aroused. I struggled to remove her panties as she refused to lift her hips, so I gripped the fabric at the elastic band and gave a sharp tug, causing them to tear off. Then I noticed thick, white semen leaking from between her vaginal lips. Clearly, I wasn't the one who put it there. For a while, I stood between her legs, listening to her cries, my eyes fixed on the strange sight of her oozing vagina. "Who have you been sleeping with behind my back, Laura?" "Oh, God, honey, I am so sorry. Will you ever forgive me? I don't love him, it was just sex with him. I love only you, Jack, please believe me. It means nothing." She broke into tears and moans again as I continued to observe the evidence of her infidelity staining the bedspread. What a bizarre situation, I thought to myself. My wife crying inconsolably, trying to convince me of her love while the proof of her betrayal slowly leaked out of her. "We need to talk. You have a lot to explain, Laura. Tell me everything, the whole truth. I want to know who he is, how long this has been happening. Most importantly, I need to know if he is the father of the child you're carrying." As soon as I mentioned the pregnancy, she sobbed even louder. For the next 15 minutes, she couldn't speak a word. Her cries and mutterings were interspersed with bouts of moaning. Finally, I fetched a wet towel from the bathroom and placed it on her forehead after wiping her face. I helped her sit on the edge of the bed, but when she tried to pull down her skirt to cover herself, I stopped her. I knew the sight of her leaking evidence was making her feel cheap, and knowing I was looking made it even harder for her. Sitting beside her on the bed, I continued to press for answers. "Who is he, Laura?" "He is Tom Higgin." "How long has this been going on? Don't lie to me. If I find out you did, it's over between us." She looked at me with pleading eyes, tears, and pain evident. "It started a while ago, hon. It meant nothing, it just happened. There was no love involved." "When did it start? When did he first sleep with you?" "It was early November. And now it's the end of June. You've been with him for 8 months, and you're 3 months pregnant. Is he the father of the baby you're carrying? Tell me. I need to know now." She cried, sobbed, and murmured apologies, telling me how sorry she was. But eventually, she answered me. "I don't know, Jack. It could be him or you, I just don't know." That was the truth. None of us knew for sure, and Laura's uncertainty about the father of her child left me feeling cheated and enraged. Despite my anger, I still loved her and wanted to remain married, but I also wanted her to suffer for betraying me. "Well, I want you to tell me how it all started, every detail. Then I'll decide what to do. You must tell me everything, understand? I won't accept any deviation from the truth. Jack, I love you so much. This had nothing to do with you, with us. Please try to understand, this was something that just happened. These are events outside our marriage, unrelated to you or my love for you." "That doesn't make sense, Laura. How can your cheating on me, betraying me like this, have nothing to do with me?" "It just happened, Jack. One day, I felt this strong urge to try his large size. It had nothing to do with my feelings for you or my love for you." I sat there, looking at her, seeing her beauty despite the painful truth of her exposed infidelity. Well, wife, tell me why one day you felt the need to try his cock. Did it justify breaking our wedding vows? Did he force you into it? No. Oh no, he didn't force me, Jack. He's not like that at all. What happened was because I wanted to satisfy my curiosity. I knew he was very well endowed, and I wanted to experience it. I initiated it all, Jack. So you asked him to sleep with you. How did it feel, Laura, to be filled by his oversized cock? Was it good? Did you enjoy it? Tell me, I want to know. I knew I was pushing her, and she was on the verge of tears again. But I needed to understand. It was different. I have to admit, Jack, I did enjoy it. I could feel it touching places inside me that had never been touched before. The sex was intense, but there was no love involved. You're the only one I'll ever love. As she described her affair with Tom, it became easier for her to tell me about their encounters. I learned that they engaged in oral sex every Saturday they met, and they had intercourse in various positions. By their third or fourth meeting, he even managed to penetrate her anally with his large size. In between their sexual encounters, during breaks, they spent a lot of time talking. In those moments, he described to her what he could do with his wife. He mentioned that he couldn't penetrate more than half of his cock into her vagina because it caused her too much pain, but he could engage in anal sex with her without discomfort. They had vaginal intercourse about once every 2 weeks, which left her walking with difficulty the following day. When I asked Laura how many times they had sex during their Saturday meetings, she said he typically climaxed 3 times, and they engaged in intercourse for about 3 hours with occasional breaks for cleaning up and resting. Why do you keep emphasizing this, Jack? I've told you there was no love between Tom and me, it was purely physical. You're the only one I love, Jack. Tell me, Laura, how would you feel if I were the one cheating on you with another woman? Even if I came home and told you I didn't love her, how would you react? I could see she didn't like hearing my question. She shook her head repeatedly and looked at me with pleading eyes, unable to find words to respond. Well, Laura, now you can understand how I feel about your affair. After that first time with him, driven by your curiosity as you say, you continued to be with him again and again. How many times did you sleep with him after that first instance? Will you ever forgive me, Jack? I promise I won't speak to him again. I'll even look for a new teaching position in September. And regarding the baby, I'll see a doctor to check if it's not too late for an abortion. No, absolutely not. The baby could be mine, and I won't allow an abortion. Besides, you're well into your pregnancy now, Laura, it's far too late for that. As for teaching at another school, it won't change anything if you could still meet him at his cottage, even if you're teaching elsewhere. She looked desperate now, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pleaded with me. Please, Jack, tell me you won't leave me. I'll be devastated if you do. Please say it. Laura, listen carefully. You've been cheating on me for many months, making me a cuckold. Worse yet, there's a good chance you're carrying his child. I want retribution, not necessarily against you because I love you too much to harm you physically, but I want justice from Tom. But I told you, it's as much my fault as his. He wouldn't willingly do anything to harm my marriage, he's not like that, believe me. Well, if he was too honorable to ask you to break your marriage vows, why did you volunteer and cheat on me? I've already explained, honey. He's not to blame. Initially, it was just curiosity on my part. If I had known then that it would hurt you so much, I would never have started this. I never meant to hurt you, Jack. Don't worry. My revenge will bring you pain too, not physical pain, but you won't like what I have planned. I'll hurt Tom the way he hurt me. I'll make him a cuckold. I'll impregnate his wife just like he did to mine. An eye for an eye is the only way I'll ever get over your betrayal. No. Please don't say that, Jack. It would destroy me. I'll do anything for you. We can move to another town, and I promise I'll never speak to him again as long as I live. I'll insist the doctor abort the baby. Laura's body trembled with emotion, her head shaking in disagreement with Jack's intentions. She seemed to shrink into herself, hunching her shoulders, clasping her elbows between her knees, her face buried in her hands, hair falling over her face. Moments stretched on, Jack sitting silently beside his devastated wife. With the blinds nearly drawn, the room was cast in semi-darkness, the only sounds from the outside world, a quiet, sunny Saturday afternoon in the neighborhood. Inside the bedroom, the only sound was Laura's crying. "Listen to me, Laura, and listen carefully. If you ever have an abortion, it's over between us. I'll never forgive you. That baby could be mine, and I want it. If you want us to stay together, you'll accept what I plan to do and help me. There's one more thing you must promise: never, under any circumstance, tell Tom that I know about your affair. I don't want him to know I've accepted your cheating. These are my conditions for us to stay together. If you refuse, we'll start divorce proceedings on Monday." Laura was more than willing to agree to all of Jack's conditions. I could see a sense of relief on her face and a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Perhaps she hoped that over time, she could change Jack's mind about Tom's wife. "Now, let's go out to eat. It's too late to cook dinner, and we won't discuss this any further today." My wife wanted to shower before going out, but I insisted she simply wear panties under her skirt and come as she was. I knew her infidelity would weigh on her as we ate, a reminder with every movement. Even though I didn't intend to discuss her affair further that day, I wanted her to be reminded of its impact on our marriage. Life continued after that fateful Saturday, and of course, Laura no longer saw Tom. I didn't want to make a big deal out of her infidelity after that day, fearing it might affect her pregnancy. Occasionally, though, I broached the topic, gradually learning that she had clearly enjoyed Tom's well-endowed nature, judging by how much pleasure she recalled deriving from it. I believe her lack of prior experience with other men before we met played a role in her decision to be with Tom. She had only been intimate with me before him, and she admitted she was curious about being with someone else. As we talked more, Laura found it easier to describe what had happened with Tom. She constantly reassured me that she would never repeat her mistake, insisting she loved me more than anything. She referred to the baby she was carrying as our baby, hoping I would fully accept this fact. I had already decided to do just that and vowed never to question the child's paternity, choosing to raise her as my own without any doubts. When Laura resumed teaching after a 2-month break in September, she was visibly over 5 months pregnant. Her swelling belly was unmistakable. Our daughter, whom we named Kim, was born in mid-January. Despite the option to test paternity, I never considered it. Deep down, I wanted Kim to be mine, and I was committed to loving and raising her as my own. After Kim's birth, Laura didn't return to teaching until the following September when Kim was nearly 9 months old. Up until then, I hadn't discussed my revenge plan with Laura, but I felt it was time. A week before she was due to start teaching again in September, I reminded her of the conditions I had set for not divorcing her. Impregnating Tom's wife was one of them. Laura likely thought I had abandoned my revenge plan, so she was taken aback when I brought it up again. It was 8 in the evening, and she had just put Kim to bed for the night. We sat together on the couch in front of the television. "Laura, there's something we need to discuss now." She looked at me pleadingly for a moment, then turned away, lowering her head to gaze at the floor. I sensed her sudden nervousness and even a hint of fear in her eyes as she avoided looking at me. But I pressed on. "You must admit, I've been quite forgiving about your affair with Tom. And you remember the conditions I set for us to stay together." Tears welled up in her eyes, and her lips trembled. I paused, giving her a moment to take in my words, but she cut me off, sobbing. "Jack, please. I haven't been with Tom since then. I don't even talk to him at school anymore. Let's forget all of this. We're happy now with Kim. Why stir things up?" "No, dear. I have unfinished business with him. Remember, one of our conditions was that I would cuckold him and impregnate his wife. I still intend to see it through. If you cooperate, it'll be easier for both of us. But if you resist, you know what will happen." Over a year ago, when she confessed to cuckolding me, I made it clear any breach of our agreement meant I'd conduct a DNA test on Kim and myself. If I wasn't her biological father, I'd divorce her and sue Tom, ending his marriage and career. If I was Kim's father, I'd still divorce her, fight for custody, and expose her affair. She knew it was lose-lose for her, so cooperation was her best option. After much discussion and pleading, we reached an agreement. She would reconnect with Tom at school and befriend his wife so I could meet her. I understood the risk of her becoming intimate with Tom again, but I was willing to take that chance for revenge. It had been over a year since they last slept together, and it was time for me to act. I noticed during our intimate moments that she craved the pleasure Tom's large cock had given her. Strangely, I didn't feel jealous. It wasn't that I loved her any less, it was more about evening the score. If she had been with another man, I might have left her immediately. But now, I was focused on balancing the scales. I no longer harbored hatred toward him. So Laura resumed talking to Tom at school, and I even suggested she meet him again at his cottage on Saturdays. At first, she was horrified by my suggestion, but over a few weeks, I subtly conveyed to her that since she had already been with him, it wouldn't be such a big deal as long as no one found out. Did she sleep with him again? I'm certain she did, judging by the changes I noticed in her behavior. She became more enthusiastic about going to work, regained her zest for life at home, reminiscent of when she was seeing him before Kim was born. Every Saturday afternoon, she'd return home, rush to her room to shower and change, and I never asked her directly if she had been with him. It was an unspoken agreement not to discuss her Saturday activities. After a few months, I finally met him, and the four of us started going out to eat together almost every Saturday evening. The first time I met Tom's wife, Ruth, I was impressed. She was petite with short black hair, looking more like Tom's daughter than his wife. Standing just over 5 feet tall, she had a beautiful, childlike face. Her large green eyes seemed to smile constantly, and her perfectly white, even teeth were always on display when she smiled. I knew I would derive great pleasure from being intimate with her. I found an opportunity to have more contact with Ruth when our daughter Kim's babysitter announced they were moving to Vancouver. Knowing Ruth didn't have a job and loved children, I called her without discussing it with Laura first. I asked if she would be interested in taking care of Kim while Laura worked. Ruth was eager, and after discussing it with her husband, she called Laura the next day to arrange to start on Monday. Laura was shocked when she found out I had hired Ruth without consulting her. "Jack, why did you do that? We should have talked about it first." Ruth seemed surprised when she learned I wasn't even aware you had offered her the job. I could sense Laura wasn't keen on having Tom's wife look after Kim. She had likely been trying to postpone the inevitable for as long as possible. "Now listen to me. I hope you remember the conditions we agreed upon for staying married. One of them is that I need to impregnate Tom's wife. What better opportunity for me to do this than to bring Kim to her house every morning and pick her up in the afternoon?" Laura burst into tears and ran to her room. An hour later, after she emerged, we had a lengthy discussion. Finally, she agreed not to stand in my way so that we could move forward with our lives together. After that day, Laura didn't bring up my determination to impregnate Ruth anymore. I think she simply accepted that it was inevitable and must have decided it was best for both of us if she pretended it wasn't happening. Each morning, after Laura left for school, I prepared Kim to stay with Ruth until 4 in the afternoon. Laura continued her work at school every Saturday afternoon. I knew she visited Tom's cottage on these occasions because I checked a couple of times and saw her getting into Tom's car shortly after arriving at school. She was having sex with him again, but our lovemaking on Saturday evenings and throughout the week was fantastic. She became very devoted to me, and I knew that while she was with Tom, it was purely for the pleasure his extra-large cock provided her. Gradually, I began spending more time with Ruth when dropping Kim off at her house. Initially, I sensed she wasn't entirely comfortable with me staying 15 minutes to talk, but over time, it became clear she enjoyed our daily conversations. Soon, I would stay an hour or more, and gradually she began confiding in me about her issues with Tom. One day, she admitted she likely would never be able to conceive a child of her own. "Why is that, Ruth? You're healthy, and there's nothing wrong with Tom that I know of. Why do you think you can't have a baby?" "It's not a health issue, Jack. It's a matter of size." I understood what she meant but pretended otherwise, encouraging her to open up so we could become more comfortable discussing intimate matters. "I'm not sure I follow, Ruth. I know Tom is much taller than you, but that shouldn't affect your ability to get pregnant. She looked at me seriously for a moment before explaining the real reason behind their difficulty. You see, Tom has a very large penis. To make matters worse, I am tighter than average down there, so you can imagine the problem we face. Every time we try to make love, it's very painful for me, and, well, we just don't do it that way. I pretended to sympathize with her, taking her hand in mine and holding it gently. I'm so sorry, Ruth. It must be incredibly difficult for you, taking care of my baby daughter and having no hope of having a child of your own. But there are other methods of conceiving. Why don't you consider them? I know there are other options, but they're all expensive. With Tom's salary, it's not enough. That's why I decided to take care of your daughter and save everything I earn until I can afford in vitro fertilization. Tears welled up in her eyes, and it was easy for me to pull her head against my chest, letting her cry as I comforted her by gently rubbing her back. Over the following days and weeks, Ruth and I became close friends. I discovered that Tom often spoke about my wife, and Ruth feared he might be falling in love with her. I also learned that most Saturday afternoons, he went to his school to prepare for classes, returning home just before dinner. Of course, I didn't mention to Ruth that Laura did the same and that they were spending their afternoons together at the cottage. The more I talked with Ruth, the more I admired her. She was well-read and informed about politics. Her love for children was evident in how she cared for Kim. In November, during one of my visits, I made a move. After Ruth had put Kim down for a morning nap, I was still at her house, sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee she had made for me. As she emerged from the room where Kim was sleeping, I asked her to sit across from me. Listen, Ruth, we've been friends for many months now, and I feel very comfortable talking with you. I believe you enjoy our conversations too. Surprise flashed across her face, and she seemed a bit nervous sitting there in front of me. But I continued. I know you dearly wish to have a child of your own, and from what you've shared, it seems Tom won't be able to make that happen. I have a suggestion for you. You can accept or reject it, but I want us to remain friends, no matter what you decide. Reaching for her hand, I held it gently between mine. You don't have to decide today, but please consider what I'm about to propose. We locked eyes for several moments, and I could sense she was beginning to understand what I was about to say. I feel like I'm falling in love with you, and there's nothing that would please me more than to have a child with you. Before you respond, let me assure you that Tom never needs to know about the paternity of your baby. If you wish, I will stop making love to you the moment you discover that you are pregnant. My penis is much smaller than Tom's, so we won't have any problems with this. I paused, giving her time to process my proposal. I felt a pang of worry seeing the strange look on her face, even detecting a hint of fear in her expression. Jack. But we're both married. This could ruin both of our marriages, she responded hesitantly. No one else needs to know, Ruth, just you and me, I reassured her. We both know this is your only chance to become a mother, and your pregnancy could have the opposite effect on your marriage. It might even save it. I could see her thoughts churning as she continued to gaze at me with a serious expression. Still holding her hand in mine, I stood closer to her as she sat there, looking down at the table. I knew this was the pivotal moment, so I made my move. With my left hand still holding hers, I gently placed my right hand on the back of her neck and began to stroke her soft skin just below her hairline. She didn't resist, and I knew I had convinced her. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos.